Summer 1945. Japan had surrendered, yet across the Pacific Islands, the uncertainty of life lingered for many. For Japanese women prisoners of war, the concept of safety had been foreign for months. Rumors swirled constantly among those who survived, stories carried by whispers in the encampments about the brutality of the Americans. They had been warned their captors would strip them of dignity, subject them to humiliation, and leave them questioning the meaning of life itself. Mothers held infants close, daughters clutched hands, and wives of soldiers braced for the unimaginable. Their lives before capture had been simple, constrained by the rules of their villages and the looming shadows of war. Yet even those who had grown up amid scarcity, hunger, and the constant fear of aerial bombardment had never imagined the psychological weight that captivity would bring. Rumors painted vivid, terrifying pictures in their minds. Cruel men with no restraint, men whose delight lay in the suffering of the conquered, whose hands and intentions knew no boundaries. When American patrols finally arrived at the remote camp where these women had been hiding, the air seemed to thicken with tension. Boots cracked against the wooden planks and dirt paths. Voices, sharp and unfamiliar, echoed through the compounds. The women pressed against the walls of their barracks, trying to make themselves small, as if disappearing would make them invisible. Eyes wide, hearts pounding, they prepared for the moment they had long feared. The Americans entered with measured movements. They did not rush. They did not shout. They did not reach for them. Instead, they brought with them large crates filled with food, with utensils and supplies that seemed almost surreal to the women who had endured weeks of near starvation. The smell of cooking meat began to drift through the camp, awakening an almost forgotten sense of hunger and, strangely, hope. At first, the women hesitated. The generous trays of eggs, bread, porridge, and sizzling strips of bacon seemed like a trick. Could this be a test? A trap? One mother stepped forward cautiously, dipping her fingers into the eggs. Her eyes flicked toward the soldiers, half expecting a punishment, half expecting them to snatch the food away. Nothing happened. The soldiers simply stepped back, rifles lowered, watching without intruding. Slowly, one by one, the women approached the tables. They observed the steaks, the roasted meats, and the stacks of bread, a meal unlike anything they had seen in years. Children squealed in delight, laughter piercing the otherwise tense atmosphere. The women shared cautious glances, whispering among themselves. "Perhaps this is real. Perhaps this is not a trick," muttered a young wife of a soldier. They began to eat, slowly savoring each bite, unsure if relief could ever feel so foreign. Hours passed, and the pattern continued. More food was brought, more provisions distributed. Yet the Americans never crossed the invisible boundary. Their presence was firm but respectful, attentive but never invasive. The women began to realize that this strange mercy might be genuine. That night, blankets were laid out for them, clean and warm, a luxury beyond imagining in the cold, cramped spaces of their previous confinement. One older woman, Sachiko, clutched her rosary, whispering a prayer she had not dared to voice in months. "Perhaps their God watches them," she murmured. Another shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. "Or perhaps they are testing us. Perhaps worse will come tomorrow." Yet as the nights passed, the pattern remained. Food was delivered, blankets replaced, water replenished, always with careful distance and restraint. Days turned into weeks, yet the women's shock never diminished. Each meal, each act of mercy, became another brick in the wall of disbelief. The American soldiers moved about the camp with purpose, guiding the women to wash at communal water pumps, assisting children to receive medical care, and providing materials for writing letters home. The women began to write cautiously, first to confirm that these gifts, these acts of consideration, were real. Slowly, messages were written. "We are alive, we are fed, we are treated with dignity." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the camp quiet except for the low murmurs of conversation, a Marine approached carrying a massive tray of cooked steaks. The aroma drifted through the air, rich and tantalizing. The women froze, eyes wide. They had been given bread and porridge, yes, but real steaks? Grilled and seasoned, accompanied by roasted vegetables, a feast beyond comprehension. Children squealed in delight again, running from the tables with steaming portions in their hands. The women glanced at one another, incredulous. This could not be happening. The soldiers simply observed from a distance, their rifles at ease, their expressions calm. No one intruded. No one spoke beyond brief instructions translated by an interpreter. The women approached the table tentatively, marveling at the generosity before them. Many took small portions at first, testing the reality of this unexpected abundance. Each bite, each chew, confirmed that the Americans had not lied, that their mercy and restraint were not a ruse. Over the next few days, the pattern of generosity continued. Breakfasts came first, generous platters of eggs, bread, and fruit. Then dinner, larger than any meal the women had been offered in months, steaks, vegetables, and occasionally treats that had been unheard of in the camp. The women began to speak quietly, among themselves, the words trembling on their lips. These men, they are not what we were told. They do not seek to humiliate us. They do not touch us. They feed us. They provide for us. Sachiko observed the younger women, many of whom had grown up in fear of men and authority. She noted the tentative smiles, the hesitant laughter, and the growing sense of disbelief that perhaps not all men were cruel. One young girl whispered, "I cannot understand. Why do they not take what they want?" Her mother hushed her softly, afraid the words might draw attention. Yet even as whispers travelled, the soldiers remained distant, their patience unbroken. Medical care continued alongside these meals. Children were examined and treated, women received basic attention for minor ailments, and no one ever crossed the boundary of respect. One day, as Sachiko watched a soldier gently tend to a child's scraped knee, she whispered, "Our own soldiers taught us to die before capture, yet here the enemy chooses life for us." Her words carried disbelief, astonishment, and a dawning understanding of what mercy could mean even in wartime. As the weeks stretched on, the women began to anticipate each meal, not with fear, but with cautious hope. The astonishment of steaks and barbecues had shifted their perception. War had taught them to expect cruelty, but in its absence, a new kind of shock took hold. The shock of dignity preserved, of basic humanity respected. Children grew stronger, mothers began to regain some of the composure that fear had stolen, and the women collectively realized that their captivity might not only spare them, but also teach them something they had never expected to learn about mercy. By late summer 1945, the women had settled into a strange rhythm. Each morning brought more food, more blankets, more care. Each evening was filled with quiet reflection, whispers of disbelief, and cautious gratitude. They wrote letters home, detailing their survival, their astonishment, and the humanity they had experienced. Ko, one of the younger women, wrote to her mother in Nagasaki, "We are treated with respect. We are fed. We are kept safe. I do not understand, but I am alive." Evenings were spent around small fires, children playing in the fading light, women sharing whispered stories of their villages, families, and the life they had left behind. The soldiers' presence was constant but non-intrusive, a reminder that authority could exist without cruelty. When blankets became worn, new ones were provided. When a child fell ill, medicine appeared without hesitation. The invisible line that the women had feared never once crossed. The shock of restraint became a lesson in itself. For decades, these women had been taught that fear and obedience were the only shields against cruelty. Yet here, their captors chose a different path: respect, patience, and the quiet assertion that humanity need not end with war. Many wondered if they would ever comprehend the depth of this mercy, and whether it was unique to this place, or perhaps universal. By September, release orders arrived. One by one, the women were escorted to boats bound for Japan. They carried small keepsakes from the Americans, bars of soap, letters, cloth, tokens of a mercy that defied understanding. As they set foot on Japanese soil, the ruins of cities and families shattered by war awaited them. Yet within each woman, a story of astonishment, dignity, and unexpected kindness had taken root. Years later, as the women reflected on those months, it was not the cruelty of war they remembered most, but the essence of it. The American soldiers had preserved their humanity, given them food, blankets, and care, and had left their dignity untouched. In diaries, letters, and whispered recollections to their daughters, the story endured, that mercy could be as astonishing, as transformative, and as unforgettable as the horrors of war themselves.